sun was lazy, pouring through the big windows of the coffee shop and making the air feel warm and slow. The place was busy, full of the low hum of people talking, the sharp hiss of the espresso machine, and the soft tapping on laptop keys. It smelled like roasted coffee beans and sweet pastries. People were tucked into corners with books or leaning over tables having quiet meetings, all in their own little worlds. Officer Dan Ridley pushed the door open, and a small bell chimed above him. He wasn't really here for coffee. His patrol car was parked out front, a clear symbol of his presence. He liked these little visits to local businesses. They were good for community relations, sure, but more than that, they were good for him. They reminded people who he was. The uniform did things. It made some people nervous, it made others overly friendly, and it gave him a kind of power in any room he walked into. He took his time walking to the counter, nodding slowly at a few customers who made eye contact. He enjoyed the way their conversations dipped for a second when they saw him. He got a large black coffee, no sugar. He didn't pay. The young guy at the register, a new kid with nervous eyes, just shook his head and said, "On the house, officer." Ridley gave him a tight smile. Of course it was. He turned, leaning his back against the counter, sipping the bitter coffee as his eyes traveled around the room. That's when he saw her. She was sitting at a small two-person table near the back, partly shielded by a large, leafy potted plant. A law textbook, thick and heavy, was open in front of her, and she was scribbling notes in a neat, quick hand in a spiral notebook. She was beautiful, but it wasn't a loud, attention-seeking kind of beauty. It was in her concentration, the way a little line of focus appeared between her eyebrows, the way she tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear without even looking up. She was completely absorbed in her work, a little island of quiet study in the middle of the noisy cafe. Something stirred in Ridley. It was a familiar feeling, a mix of boredom, entitlement, and a desire to disrupt that quiet focus. He liked proving that his presence was more important than any book. He pushed himself off the counter and started moving through the tables, his boots making a soft, deliberate sound on the wooden floor. He stopped right at the edge of her table, his shadow falling across the pages of her book. She didn't look up immediately, hoping he would just move on. He didn't. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low, official rumble. She finally glanced up, her eyes a calm, clear brown. "Hello, officer." Her voice was polite, but flat. She offered a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, and then looked back down at her text, a clear signal that the conversation was over. He didn't take the hint. He shifted his weight, making himself more solidly planted there. "Everything okay over here? You look very focused." He let the last word hang in the air, implying something more. "Just studying." "Thank you," she said, not looking up this time, her pen continuing to move. "Big book," he said, reaching out and tapping the cover with a thick finger. "Law school? That's tough. You must be really smart." It sounded like a compliment, but his tone was all wrong. It was sticky, like syrup. She paused her writing. "Yes, it's a lot of work." She tried to infuse her tone with a finality, hoping he would hear the "please leave me alone" in it. He didn't. Instead, he pulled out the empty chair opposite her and sat down without being invited. The wood groaned under his weight. He set his coffee cup on her table, right next to her notebook. It was an invasion, a claim of territory. She subtly pulled her notebook a few inches closer to herself. "Don't see many pretty girls buried in books like this on a nice day," he said, leaning forward on his elbows. His gaze was no longer on the book, but squarely on her face, then drifting down, then back up. It was a slow, appraising look that made her skin feel tight. She felt a cold trickle of unease in her stomach. The politeness was a shield, but it was getting thin. "I have an exam," she said, her voice a little tighter now. All work and no play, he chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. A girl like you should be out enjoying herself. You know, a friend of mine owns a nice bar downtown. Quiet, classy. Maybe I could give you a tour after my shift. We could talk about your career plans. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was a smile that offered a deal, one where he held all the cards. The girl, whose name was Maya, though Ridley hadn't bothered to ask, felt a hot flush of anger rise up her neck, mixing with the cold fear. She knew this game. She'd seen it before, but never so brazenly, never from someone wearing a badge. The uniform was supposed to mean safety. On him, right now, it felt like a threat. That's not going to happen, she said, her voice clear and firm now. She looked him directly in the eyes. I need to study. Please, I'd like you to leave my table. She emphasized the my. Ridley's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of irritation. He wasn't used to being dismissed. His authority was being questioned, and by a young girl with a book. He leaned in even closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more threatening than his loud talk. Look, he said, his eyes hard. I'm just trying to be friendly. It's good to have friends in this city, especially friends who know the law, if you catch my drift. He let the vague threat hang in the air. I noticed your car out there, the little blue hatchback, parked awfully close to the hydrant, don't you think? I'd hate for you to get a ticket, or have it towed. That would really ruin your study day. This was the move. The shift from fake charm to open coercion. He was no longer asking. He was implying a trade. Her time, her attention, her compliance, in exchange for him not using his power to punish her. Maya's heart was pounding against her ribs. She knew her car was perfectly legally parked. This was pure invention, a tool. She felt trapped. If she yelled, would anyone help her against a police officer? If she gave in to his disgusting offer, what then? Her mind raced, but her face remained a careful mask of calm. She didn't answer him. She just held his gaze, her own filled with a cold, defiant silence. Unseen by Officer Ridley, this entire performance had an audience of one. In the far corner, partially obscured by a tall shelf of coffee mugs and bags of beans, a man in a well-cut but simple suit had been typing on a laptop. He had seen Ridley walk in. He had watched the officer's posture change as he spotted the young woman. He had seen the uninvited sit-down, the leaning in, the shift in the young woman's body language from relaxed to rigid. His own typing had stopped minutes ago. His hands were now still on the keyboard, his face an impassive mask. But his eyes, a sharp, focused gray, missed nothing. They watched the whispered threat, the fear in the set of the young woman's shoulders, the arrogant set of the officer's jaw. A deep, cold anger began to burn quietly in the pit of his stomach. This was happening in his city, in his coffee shop, under his watch. And he had seen enough. The man in the corner was Police Chief Elias Vance. He had come to this specific coffee shop, 2 blocks from headquarters, for a simple reason: noise. In his quiet office, the weight of the city's problems felt heavy and silent. Here, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of life, the clatter of cups, the murmured conversations, the laughter from a group of friends he could think. He was working on a draft of a speech about community trust, a topic that had been keeping him up at night. The words on his screen felt flat and empty. He needed to hear the community. He was writing about to find the right ones. He had noticed the young woman with the law book when he sat down. He appreciated her focus. It reminded him of his own daughter, now in college, who would camp out in cafes just like this one, surrounded by her own towers of textbooks. He'd given her a small, private smile of recognition, before turning to his work. Then he saw the officer walk in. Chief Vance knew the type immediately. It was in the walk, the slow scan of the room, the way he accepted the free coffee without a second thought. Vance's own posture had stiffened just a little. He watched, not as a customer anymore, but as a commander. He told himself he was just observing. Maybe this officer was just being visible, making a friendly round. But then the officer's path went straight to the young woman's table. Vance watched the whole approach. He saw the officer's initial stance, the way he loomed over her. He saw the young woman's first polite but closed-off response, the way she tried to shrink back into her book. From this distance, he couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language like a book. The story was all too clear, and it was a story he despised. A hot, familiar anger started to bloom in his chest. It was the anger of broken promises. He had stood in front of his officers just last month, his voice stern, talking about integrity, about the sacredness of the badge, about the public's trust being their most important tool. He had looked into their faces and believed, or wanted to believe, that the message was getting through. And here, in a public place, one of his own was using that badge as a tool for something ugly, something predatory. His first fierce instinct was to stand up, to stride over there, put a hand on the officer's shoulder, and end it right then, to tell the young woman she was safe, and to order the officer back to his car. The muscle in his jaw tightened, and he started to push his chair back, but then he stopped. A colder, more calculating professionalism washed over him, cooling the initial flash of fury. If he intervened now, it would be his word against the officer's. The officer would claim he was just making friendly conversation, checking on a citizen. The young woman might be too scared or flustered to give a clear statement. It could get messy, and in the mess, the officer might slip away with just a warning, a slap on the wrist. He would learn nothing except to be more careful next time. And there would be a next time. Chief Vance knew this poison. It didn't die with a warning. It had to be cut out, cleanly and completely. For that, he needed proof. Not just for himself, but for internal affairs, for the disciplinary board. Proof that would be undeniable. His movements were slow and deliberate. He didn't want to draw any attention. He kept his eyes on the scene at the table. The officer had now sat down, uninvited, and was leaning in close. The young woman's face was pale, her shoulders hunched. The officer was smiling, that terrible, knowing smile. Vance casually reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his personal phone, not his department-issued one. He opened his audio recording app. He set the phone down on the table next to his laptop, the screen dark, the microphone pointed, as best he could, toward the drama unfolding 20 feet away. He hit the record button. A small red dot appeared. He felt a twist of disgust at the necessity of it. This wasn't spycraft. It was surgery, and he needed a clean incision. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his own now-cold coffee, his face a mask of passive concentration on his laptop screen. But he wasn't reading a word. Every ounce of his attention was focused on that table. He was listening, not just to the muffled words he could now barely catch, but to the music of the interaction, the tone. He heard the low, insinuating rumble of the officer's voice. He couldn't make out every word, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the sound of someone offering a deal where they held all the power. Then he saw the officer's hand gesture vaguely toward the window. He saw the young woman's eyes flicker with a new, sharper fear. The officer's smile widened. That was the click of the trap being set. Chief Vance's fingers tightened around his coffee mug. He thought of his daughter again, sitting in a cafe somewhere, trying to build her future. What if it were? What if some man in a uniform, someone she was supposed to be able to trust, used his authority to corner her, to scare her, to demand her time and her smile as a toll for her safety. The thought made his blood feel like ice water in his veins. He watched the young woman's response. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She locked eyes with the officer, and even from across the room, Vance could see the defiance in her stance. She was scared, yes, but she wasn't broken. She was fighting back with silence, with a cold, steady glare. A part of him, the part that was a father and a decent man, swelled with a fierce pride for this stranger. She had a strength he hadn't seen in many seasoned officers. The officer, however, seemed to read her defiance as a challenge. His posture changed. The false friendliness dropped away. His shoulders squared, and he leaned in even further, invading the last of her personal space. His mouth moved, forming slower, clearer words now. Vance strained to hear. A few distinct phrases, carried by a lull in the cafe's noise, reached his corner. Friends who know the law. Your car out there. Awfully close. Hate for you to get a ticket. Or have it towed. That was it. The explicit threat. The move from harassment to coercion. The abuse of power was now complete and undeniable. It was no longer about inappropriate comments. It was about using the threat of official action to force personal compliance. Chief Vance looked at the timer on his recording app. It had been running for just under 3 minutes. 3 minutes of a young woman's afternoon stolen. 3 minutes of his officer betraying his oath. 3 minutes that captured the exact cancer he was trying to cut out of his department. He stopped the recording. The red dot vanished. He saved the file, giving it a simple name. The date, the time, the coffee shop's name. Evidence. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt a deep, weary sadness mixed with that cold, resolved anger. This was the part of the job he hated most, policing his own. But it was also the most important part. The community's trust wasn't broken by criminals. Criminals were the reason the trust needed to exist. It was broken by moments exactly like this, in quiet coffee shops, by people who were supposed to be protectors. He took a final, slow breath, centering himself. The time for watching was over. Now it was time to be the chief. He closed his laptop with a quiet, firm click. The sound seemed louder than it was in his own ears. He stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. His movements were calm, controlled, but there was a new gravity to them. He was no longer just a man in a corner. He was a force about to be applied. He began to walk, not with hurried steps, but with a steady, inevitable pace, directly toward the table where the young woman sat trapped in the shadow of a bad cop's smile. The air around the small table had grown thick and heavy. To the young woman, whose name was Maya, the sounds of the coffee shop had faded into a dull, rushing noise in her ears. All she could see was the officer's smug face. All she could feel was the cold threat behind his whispered words about her car. Her mind was racing, trying to find an exit, a way to shout for help without making everything worse. The badge on his chest, which should have been a symbol of safety, now felt like a weapon, pointed right at her. Officer Ridley watched her struggle. He saw the fear in her eyes, and it fed something in him. He wasn't used to people holding his gaze like she was. Most people, when he put a little pressure on, they folded. They got nervous. They apologized for things they didn't do. They tried to laugh it off. This girl was just staring at him, silent and cold. It was irritating. He needed to break that stare, to make her understand who was in charge here. He leaned back in his chair, making it creak, and gave a slow, ugly smile. "So," he said, his voice still low but losing its fake friendly tone, "what's it gonna be? We can settle this the easy way. I finish my coffee, you finish your studying, and maybe later we have a real conversation. Or," he paused, letting the word hang, "it can get complicated. You think you're busy now? Wait till you're dealing with a tow yard and a couple $100 in fines." make studying real hard. He was enjoying this. The power was a tangible thing in his hands. He was deciding her afternoon, maybe her whole week. And all he wanted was a little something for himself in return. A little respect. A little of her time. It didn't seem like much to ask from his point of view. Maya opened her mouth, her voice dry and tight. "My car is legally parked." It was all she could think to say, a weak defense against an irrational attack. Ridley just shrugged, a wide, easy movement. "I guess we see the law differently. I'm the one with the ticket book." He tapped the bulky notepad on his duty belt for emphasis. "I say it's too close. That's what matters." It was at that exact moment that a shadow fell across the table, blocking the warm slice of afternoon sun that had been lighting the pages of her book. The shadow was tall and still. Ridley, annoyed at the interruption, glanced up, a frown already on his face. His eyes traveled up from the polished shoes, past the well-tailored suit, and landed on the face of the man standing there. The frown didn't just melt away. It shattered. Every bit of color drained from Ridley's face, leaving it a sickly, pale gray. His mouth, which had been so quick with threats and smirks, went completely slack. The word "sir" tried to form on his lips, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, and not a friendly one. Chief Elias Vance did not look at the officer. Not yet. His entire focus was on the young woman. His expression was serious, but not angry. It was steady, like a rock in a stream. He saw the fear in her eyes, the tightness around her mouth, the way her hands were clenched together in her lap. He saw the heavy law book, a shield that had failed her. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was calm, clear, and carried a quiet authority that was completely different from Ridley's bullying tone. "My name is Elias Vance. I am the chief of police for this city. Are you all right?" The sound of those words, that title, spoken in that tone, was like a crack in a dam for Maya. The tightness in her chest released just enough for her to take a sharp, shaky breath. The relief was so sudden, it was almost dizzying. She nodded, unable to speak for a second. She just looked at this new man, this chief, and saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in the officer's. Concern. Real professional concern. I'm okay," she managed to say, her voice a whisper. Only then did Chief Vance turn his head. He looked at Officer Ridley. It wasn't a glare, not in the fiery, dramatic sense. It was worse. It was a look of pure, cold assessment. It was the look a scientist might give a failed experiment, or a mechanic might give a broken, useless part. There was no rage in it, only a deep, profound disappointment and a final, settled decision. Ridley finally found his voice. It came out as a choked, ragged thing. "Chief Vance." "Sir, I was checking on a citizen." She seemed. There was a potential issue with her vehicle. Officer Ridley. Vance's voice cut through the stammering like a knife. It was not loud, but it was absolute. It left no room for argument, for story, for excuse. "Your shift ended 10 minutes ago." The words hung in the air. They were so simple, so administrative, and yet they carried the weight of a judgment. Asterisk, you are already off the clock. You have no official reason to be here doing this. Asterisk. Ridley opened his mouth again, but Vance continued, his tone flat and procedural. You are now on immediate administrative leave. You will stand up. You will proceed directly to your personal vehicle. You will place your service weapon and your badge on the passenger seat. You will then drive directly to your residence. You will await a call from the Internal Affairs Division. Do you understand these orders? Each sentence was a nail. Ridley felt the world tilting underneath him. Administrative leave. Internal affairs. The words echoed in his hollowed-out mind. This wasn't a scolding. This was the end. He could see it in the chief's eyes. This was the end of his career, his life as he knew it. But Chief, I can explain. Ridley tried one last time, a desperate, childish plea. Do not speak, Vance said, and the temperature in his voice dropped even further. Go now. There was something in that final command that broke the last of Ridley's resistance. The bluster, the false power, it all evaporated. Under the chief's unwavering gaze, he was just a man in a uniform that no longer meant what he thought it did. He looked smaller. He fumbled with his chair, standing up awkwardly. He couldn't look at the young woman. He couldn't look at anyone. His face was a mask of pure, stunned shame. He turned and walked, not with his earlier swagger, but with the stiff, shuffling gait of someone marching to their own execution. Every eye in the coffee shop followed him as he pushed through the door, the little bell chiming his retreat. Silence pressed in on the table for a long minute. The entire shop was quiet. Then, slowly, the normal sounds began to seep back in the espresso machine. A cleared throat, the hesitant resumption of conversations. Now buzzing with a new urgent topic, Chief Vance pulled out the chair Ridley had vacated. But he didn't sit in it. He turned it around and sat down, placing himself between Maya and the rest of the room, giving her a small buffer from the staring eyes. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees. I am deeply sorry for what just happened, he said to her, his voice returning to that calm, sincere tone. What that officer did was wrong. It was an abuse of his authority, and it will be dealt with. You have my word on that. Maya nodded again, her thoughts beginning to settle. The fear was receding, replaced by a shaky, overwhelming relief. He said he was going to tow my car. I heard him, Vance said. And I saw him. I have been sitting in that corner for the last 20 minutes. I witnessed the entire interaction. He didn't mention the recording, not yet. That was for the official process. Your car is perfectly fine. No one is touching it. You are not in any trouble. He reached into his inside suit pocket and pulled out 2 cards. He slid them across the table to her. One was his official business card. The other was a plain card with a phone number and the name of a victim's advocacy service. My direct line is on that card, he said, pointing to his own. If you have any questions, or if anyone bothers you about this, you call me. The other card is for a support service, if you need to talk to someone. What happens next is that Internal Affairs will contact you. They will need a formal statement from you about what occurred. You are not obligated to give one, but it would be very helpful. Would you be willing to do that? Maya looked at the cards, then back at the police chief's earnest, tired face. She picked up his card, holding it between her fingers. It felt solid, real. A promise. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. I'll give a statement. A small, grateful nod from the chief. Thank you. He glanced toward the door, then back at her. Would you like me to walk you to your car? She thought about it. Part of her wanted to just be alone, to process the whirlwind of the last few minutes. But another part, a smarter part, appreciated the offer. The officer was gone, but the feeling of vulnerability wasn't. Yes, please, she said. That would be? Thank you. She started to gather her things, her hands still trembling slightly as she closed the heavy law book. The words on the cover about justice and procedure seemed to have a new, much heavier meaning now. As she stood, with the chief of police standing patiently beside her, she felt the eyes of the coffee shop on her again. But this time, it felt different. She didn't feel like a victim. She felt, for the first time since the officer had sat down, safe. The chief's sedan was parked a few spaces down from Maya's little blue hatchback. It was an unmarked car, dark and quiet. He opened the passenger door for her, a simple, polite gesture that felt a million miles away from the officer's invasive presence. The inside of the car was clean and smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. It felt official, but not intimidating. They sat for a moment in silence. The bubble of the coffee shop was gone, replaced by the ordinary sounds of the city afternoon, a distant siren, the rumble of a bus, kids laughing on the sidewalk. The normalcy of it all felt strange to Maya. Her heart was still beating a little. Too fast. Chief Vance didn't start the engine. He turned slightly in his seat to face her. "Take your time," he said. "When you're ready, I'd like to hear what happened in your own words. This will be an informal statement, just for me to understand fully. Later, Internal Affairs will do a formal interview, probably at the station, in a more comfortable room. But right now, I just need to listen." His calmness was a steady anchor. Maya took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. She looked at her hands, folded in her lap, and then she began to talk. She started from the beginning, the officer looming over her table, the comments about her looks and her studying, the way he sat down without asking. Her voice was shaky at first, but as she spoke, it grew stronger. The words came out in a rush, detailing the creeping dread, the whispered threat about the bar, and finally the cold fear when he mentioned her car and a tow truck. Saying it all out loud to someone who clearly believed her, someone in charge, made the experience feel less like a personal violation and more like a factual report. She was a law student, after all. She understood the importance of facts. Chief Vance listened without interrupting. He nodded occasionally, his face serious and focused. He didn't get angry or make dramatic promises of revenge. He just listened. When she finished, he said, "Thank you. That was very clear. I am sorry you had to go through that. No one should have to, especially from someone wearing that uniform." He then told her briefly what he had seen from his corner table. He mentioned the change in the officer's posture, the visible shift from a professional check-in to a personal pursuit. He wanted her to know she wasn't alone in her observation. "What you described matches exactly what I witnessed," he said. "That is important." Then he started the car. "I'm going to drive us around the block to the station. It's just 2 minutes away. We can go to my office, and you can call anyone you need to a friend, a family member. You can have some water. Take a moment. Then, if you're still willing, we can get the formal process started with Internal Affairs. You are in complete control here. You can say no to any part of this at any time. Do you understand?" Maya nodded. "I understand. And I want to do it." The formal statement. A small, approving look crossed his tired face. "Good." As they pulled away from the curb, Maya looked out the window. She saw her coffee shop, now just another storefront. The drama was already sealed inside, becoming a story people would tell their friends. She felt a strange detachment from it. Across town. Officer Ridley sat in his personal car, a spotless SUV, parked in the driveway of his tidy, silent house. He hadn't gone inside. He couldn't move. The chief's words played on a loop in his head. Immediate administrative leave. Internal Affairs. Your service weapon and your badge. He had done as he was told. The heavy gun was now a cold, dead weight on his passenger seat, next to the shiny badge that he had polished just that morning. They looked like artifacts from someone else's life. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a crawling, sickening panic. His mind scrambled for a lifeline. He could claim it was a misunderstanding. He was just being friendly. The girl had taken it the wrong way. She was nervous. She overreacted. He was just talking about her car as a courtesy. He rehearsed the lines in his head, trying to make them sound believable. But then he saw the chief's face in his memory. That cold, disappointed look. The chief hadn't looked like a man who had heard a misunderstanding. He had looked like a man who had seen the truth, clear and ugly dot, and then another, worse thought hit him. The coffee shop. It had cameras. There were witnesses. Dozens of them. That quiet man in the suit by the bookshelf, the college kids at the big table, the barista behind the counter. They had all seen him sit down. They had all seen him lean in. They had all seen the chief appear. His story wouldn't just be his word against the scared girls. It would be his word against the police chiefs, against security footage, against a whole room of people. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. This wasn't going to be a warning. This was going to be a firing, and not a quiet one. Internal Affairs would pick his life apart. They'd look at his past stops, his conduct reports. He thought of a few other times, moments he'd brushed off, where he'd pushed the line with a driver or made a comment to a woman on the street. Little things, he'd told himself. Nothing serious. But now, under a microscope, they wouldn't look like little things. They would look like a pattern. The reality closed in on him, heavy and suffocating. He wasn't just losing his job. He was losing his identity. Who was he without the badge? Without the uniform? The respect it commanded? The fear it sometimes inspired? He was just a man sitting alone in a car, too terrified to walk into his own empty house. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk back at the police headquarters. Things moved with a quiet, efficient speed. Chief Vance escorted Maya to a small, pleasant interview room in the Internal Affairs wing, not the cold, sterile rooms used for criminal interrogations. He introduced her to a calm, professional woman from the Victim Services Unit, who sat with her, got her a bottle of water, and explained every step of what would happen next. The Internal Affairs detective, who took her statement, was a serious man with a gentle voice. He asked clear, precise questions, never doubting her, just seeking details. He recorded the conversation with her permission. He showed her still images from the coffee shop security footage, time-stamped. There she was, studying. There was Officer Ridley, approaching. There he was, sitting down. The video had no sound, but the story it told was undeniable. Seeing it from that overhead angle, seeing her own body language shrink away, was hard. But it also felt validating. It was proof. While Maya was giving her statement, Chief Vance was in his office, making calls. He called the head of Internal Affairs. He forwarded the audio recording from his phone through a secure channel. He called the city's legal department to give them a heads-up. The process was a machine, and he had just dropped a massive problem into its gears. He knew the machine would grind thoroughly, and in this case, he was glad of it. News, in a city, has a way of leaking. It doesn't come from official press releases first. It comes from whispers. A barista tells a regular. The regular tells their friend who works at the newspaper. A witness posts a vague but exciting story on social media. By that evening, the outline of the story was out. Police chief catches officer harassing woman in coffee shop. The details were fuzzy, but the core fact was there, and it spread fast. The police department's public information officer started getting calls. Chief Vance had prepared for this. He authorized a brief, factual statement. We can confirm an officer was placed on administrative leave today, following an incident at a downtown business. The matter is under investigation by our Internal Affairs Division. We take all allegations of misconduct with the utmost seriousness. It gave away nothing, but it confirmed enough to make the story real for Ridley. Sitting in the darkening gloom of his car, the phone finally rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, but he knew who it would be. Internal Affairs. He stared at it, his heart pounding a violent rhythm against his ribs. The sound was like a fire alarm in the silence of the car. He let it ring until it went to voicemail. He needed more time to think, to build his crumbling castle of excuses. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to look, he knew the walls had already fallen. There was no castle left. There was only the long, hard fall that was just beginning. A month later, the air in the city council chambers was different. It wasn't the usual dry, bureaucratic feeling. The room was fuller. There were reporters in the back, a few community activists in the audience, and more police officers in uniform than usual, sitting stiffly in their seats. A current of quiet expectation hummed in the room. Chief Elias Vance stood at the podium, his hands resting lightly on the edges. He wasn't reading from the speech he'd been trying to write in the coffee shop that day. That draft was gone. The paper in front of him was new, the words on it forged in the fire of a difficult few weeks. "Madam Chair, members of the council," he began, his voice carrying easily in the quiet room. "I come before you today not with a generic report on community relations, but with a proposal born from a failure. A failure of one of my officers, and in some ways, a failure of our systems to prevent that officer's actions." He didn't use names. He didn't mention the coffee shop by name. But everyone in the room knew the story he was referencing. It had been in the papers, discussed on local news, whispered about in every precinct and neighborhood watch meeting. "We train our officers for many things," Vance continued, looking out at the faces, meeting the eyes of his own officers in the crowd. "We train them to use force, to de-escalate situations, to navigate complex laws. But for too long, we have assumed that the most basic principle, the duty to protect the public from harm, even when that harm comes from within our own ranks, was simply understood. We assumed that the badge itself was enough of a guide. An incident last month proved that assumption can be dangerously wrong." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He wasn't there to grandstand or to vilify one man. His tone was matter-of-fact, weary, and determined. What we witnessed was not just an officer crossing a line. It was an officer using the authority of this city, the symbol of our collective safety, to create fear and to seek personal gratification. And the most damaging part of the incident was the silence that allowed it to happen for as long as it did. The silence of the room, born from the public's reasonable fear of challenging an armed officer, and the silence of systems that did not explicitly command other officers to break that silence. He held up a single sheet of paper. "So today, I am proposing the adoption of a new, concrete protocol. I'm calling it the Duty to Intervene and Report Protocol. But my officers have already given it a simpler name. They call it the Coffee Shop Protocol." A soft ripple went through the room. "The protocol is straightforward," Vance explained, his voice gaining a stronger, more resolute edge. "First, it makes it a formal duty for any officer who witnesses another officer engaging in misconduct, including excessive force, theft, discrimination, or sexual harassment, to intervene immediately to stop that misconduct, if it is safe to do so. Second, it requires the officer to file a formal report of the incident before the end of their shift, without fear of retaliation. And third, it mandates that any supervisor receiving such a report must act on it immediately. Just as I was forced to act last month." He looked down at his notes, then back up, his gaze sweeping the council and the public. "This is not about snitching. This is about stewardship. It is about recognizing that the true strength of a police department is not in its silence, but in its integrity. The badge does not protect the officer who wears it wrongly. It is protected by the officers who wear it rightly. This protocol gives those good officers the clear authority and the obligation to be the guardians of their own profession." In her apartment. Maya was watching the live stream of the council meeting on her laptop. Her textbook was open next to her, but she hadn't looked at it in 20 minutes. She listened to the chief speak, hearing the echoes of that terrible afternoon in his measured words. She felt a complicated mix of emotions. There was still a raw spot inside her, a memory of feeling trapped and small. But as she listened to Vance outline the new rules, that raw spot was covered by something else, a sense of purpose. She hadn't just been a victim of something ugly. She had, without ever wanting to be, become a catalyst. Her uncomfortable, frightening experience was being transformed into a rule that might protect someone else. It was a strange kind of justice, not vengeful, but preventive. She thought about the internal affairs process, which was now complete. It had been grueling but fair. She had been kept informed. She knew the officer had been officially terminated, not just for the incident with her, but because the investigation had uncovered a pattern of concerning behavior during other traffic stops. His certification to be a police officer in the state had been revoked. He wouldn't be moving to another town to start over. That chapter was closed. The chief's voice came through her speakers. Some will ask why we need a rule for what should be common decency. My answer is this: because power without clear accountability corrupts. And because good people, in the face of a colleague's wrongdoing, often need the cover of policy to do what their conscience already knows is right. This protocol is that cover. It is a promise, written down, that we will police ourselves so the public never has to doubt that we are here to serve them. Maya closed her laptop softly. The room was quiet. She looked out her window at the city lights starting to come on. The coffee shop was out there somewhere. The campus was out there. Her future was out there. For the first time since that day, the thought of putting on a professional blazer and walking into a room full of powerful people didn't fill her with a secret dread. She had seen power used for predation, and she had seen it in the form of a tired police chief used to cut that predation out. She understood now, in a way no textbook could ever teach, that the law was just words on paper. It was the people who carried it out, their character, their courage, their willingness to hold the line, that gave it meaning. Asterisk, 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 the story in the media had shifted. The initial scandal had been juicy. Bad cop caught by boss. But the lasting story, the one that got the editorial praise, was about accountability. It was titled, "The Chief Who Listened." It highlighted how Vance had turned a moment of profound embarrassment for the department into a moment of institutional learning. Other city leaders called, asking for a copy of the coffee shop protocol. It became a model. For Chief Vance, the real victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in the quiet conversations. A young patrol officer stopped him in the hallway a week after the council approved the new protocol. The officer looked nervous. "Chief," he said, "about that protocol, I wanted to say I think it's right. It makes it clear. It makes it easier to know what to do." Vance had just nodded. "That's the point, officer. To make doing the right thing the easiest path." The poison of that one officer's actions had been drawn. The department hadn't closed ranks to protect its own. It had, publicly and painfully, excised its own infection. The community's trust, which was a fragile, living thing, hadn't broken. It had, surprisingly, grown a little stronger. People had seen that the system, when it worked correctly, could be its own best critic and its own healer. The incident became a defining lesson, a story told in roll calls and training seminars, not as a tale about a monster, but as a cautionary tale about a slow slide, about the abuse of tiny powers, and about the absolute necessity of having someone, whether it's a chief in a suit or a partner in a patrol car, willing to say, "No, this stops here." The shield, the protocol now stated, would never again be used to protect predators from within their own ranks. Its only job was to protect the public. Everyone, finally, was clear on that.